The scorching twin suns of Zerion 7 beat down mercilessly on the red desert sand. Corporal Kim Woo pressed his face against the burning ground, trying to block out the screaming pain shooting through his left leg. The bone was definitely broken, maybe in 2 places. Every movement sent white-hot agony up his spine, but he had to keep moving. The alternative was death. 3 hours ago, he had been part of Bravo Company, a tight unit of 300 soldiers defending Outpost Miranda. Now he was alone, crawling through an endless sea of crimson sand dunes, leaving a trail of blood behind him like breadcrumbs in a fairy tale. Except this fairy tale had no happy ending waiting. The attack had come without warning. One moment, Private Lee Jin was complaining about the terrible coffee in the mess hall. The next, the sky was filled with Corvani dropships, their hulls gleaming like black mirrors against the alien sunset. The enemy had hit them hard and fast, overwhelming, their defenses in less than 20 minutes. Wu remembered the chaos, laser fire cutting through the air like deadly light shows, the thunderous boom of artillery shells exploding all around the base, the terrified shouts of his fellow soldiers as they realized they were completely outnumbered. He had watched his best friend Sergeant Park Min get vaporized by a Corvani energy weapon right in front of him. 1 second Min was there, cracking jokes even in the middle of battle. The next second, there was nothing but empty air and the smell of ozone. The communications tower had been the first target destroyed, no way to call for backup, no way to warn Earth Command about the massive Corvani force that had somehow slipped past their early warning systems. The human colony on Zerion 7 was completely cut off from the rest of the galaxy. Wu had been manning the eastern wall when the explosion knocked him unconscious. A Corvani plasma grenade had detonated close enough to throw him 30 feet through the air. When he woke up, the base was silent except for the crackling of fires. Everyone was dead. The Corvani had moved on, probably to attack the civilian settlements deeper in the desert. Now he dragged himself forward inch by painful inch, using his rifle as a makeshift crutch. His water supply was almost gone. The emergency rations in his pack would last maybe 1 more day. His leg was getting worse, swelling up inside his combat boot until he could barely feel his toes. The first aid kit contained painkillers, but he was saving those for when things got really desperate. The desert stretched endlessly in every direction. Rocky outcroppings jutted up from the sand, like the bones of some ancient giant. The air shimmered with heat waves, making it impossible to judge distances accurately. Every shadow could hide an enemy. Every sound could be his last warning before the Corvani patrol found him. But Kim Woo was not ready to give up. His grandfather had fought in the Korean War back on Earth, surviving 3 years as a prisoner of war. His father had been part of the first wave of colonists who terraformed the moons of Jupiter. The Wu family did not surrender easily. He gritted his teeth and kept crawling forward, 1 handful of burning sand at a time. Somewhere out there, help might be coming. Somewhere out there, other humans might still be alive and fighting. He just had to survive long enough to find them. The shadow fell across Kim Woo like a dark cloud blocking out the twin suns. He had been crawling for what felt like hours when exhaustion finally forced him to collapse behind a cluster of jagged rocks. His broken leg had gone completely numb, which was probably not a good sign. The pain medication from his first aid kit was wearing off and reality was starting to crash back down on him. That was when he heard the footsteps, not the heavy boots of human soldiers or the mechanical whir of rescue vehicles. These were different, lighter than expected, but with an odd clicking sound like claws tapping against stone. Wu tried to grip his rifle tighter, but his hands were shaking too badly from dehydration and shock. The creature that stepped around the rocks was unlike anything he had ever seen in person, though every human soldier knew what a Corvani looked like from the training videos. This one was clearly female, based on the narrower build and the intricate patterns carved into her crystalline skin. She stood at least 12 feet tall, making Wu feel like a child in comparison. Her body was covered in what looked like living crystal, translucent plates that shifted color as she moved. The harsh sunlight hit her skin and broke apart into rainbow patterns that danced across the desert sand. 6 arms extended from her torso, each one ending in hands that had too many fingers. Her face was almost human-like, except for the large, black eyes that seemed to absorb light instead of reflecting it. Velnara. That was what the other Corvani had called her when she led the assault on the human base. Wu remembered her voice booming across the battlefield, issuing commands in their strange musical language. She had been the one directing the attack that killed all his friends. Now she stood over him like a giant, her head tilted to one side, as if she was studying some interesting specimen. Wu waited for the killing blow. He had seen what Corvani weapons could do to human bodies. It would be quick, at least, but the attack never came. Instead, Velnara crouched down beside him, moving, with surprising grace for something so large. Up close, Wu could see that her crystalline skin was not just decorative. It seemed to pulse with its own inner light, and he could make out what looked like veins of energy running beneath the surface. Her 6 arms moved independently, like she was conducting an invisible orchestra. The Corvani had been humanity's nightmare for almost 10 years now. They had appeared seemingly from nowhere, attacking human colonies with ruthless efficiency. Entire worlds had been evacuated or simply gone silent. The few survivors who escaped always told the same story. The Corvani showed no mercy, took no prisoners, and left nothing behind but ash and radiation. Earth Command had tried everything. Diplomatic missions that never returned, military strikes that accomplished nothing except getting more humans killed, peace treaties that the Corvani ignored completely. As far as anyone could tell, their goal was simple: the complete elimination of humanity from the galaxy. Velnara represented everything that kept human children awake at night. She was death-given form, the monster that parents warned their kids about. Her people had turned First Contact into a war of extinction, yet here she was, studying him with what almost looked like curiosity instead of hatred. Her black eyes reflected his own broken image back at him, and for a moment, Wu wondered if maybe there was more to these creatures than anyone had realized. Kim Wu stared up at the towering alien warrior, his vision blurring from pain and dehydration. He should have been terrified. Every instinct screamed at him to run, to fight, to do something other than lie there helplessly. But his body had nothing left to give. His broken leg throbbed with each heartbeat, and his throat felt like sandpaper. Still, he refused to beg. Velnara watched him struggle to sit up against the rocks, his face twisted in agony, but his eyes burning with defiance. She had expected him to plead for his life like the other humans she had encountered. Instead, this small, fragile creature glared at her with the same fierce determination she had seen in her own warriors. In the Corvani language, there was a word for this kind of stubborn courage: Velthak. It meant refusing to submit even when death was certain. It was considered the highest honor a warrior could achieve. She had never expected to see it in a human. For over 3,000 years, Corvani law had been clear. Humans were the enemy. They spread across worlds like a plague, consuming resources and multiplying without control. The ancient texts called them the devouring swarm, a species that would eventually consume the entire galaxy if left unchecked. Every Corvani child learned that showing mercy to humans was not just foolish, but dangerous. Yet something about this broken soldier made her hesitate. Wu tried to reach for his rifle, but his arms were too weak. The weapon lay just inches from his fingertips, but it might as well have been on another planet. He could barely keep his eyes open, let alone fight a 12-foot-tall alien warrior. Velnara noticed the human's condition. His lips were cracked and bleeding from dehydration. His skin had taken on a grayish color that she recognized as the early stages of system failure. Without water and medical attention, he would be dead within hours. The logical thing would be to leave him here. The desert would finish what her people had started, and she could return to her unit with a clear conscience. No Corvani law would be broken. No questions would be asked. But she found herself thinking about the way he had looked at her, not with the terror she was used to seeing in human faces, but with something closer to respect, as if he recognized her as a fellow warrior rather than just a monster. In her people's culture, warriors shared a sacred bond that transcended species. It was an ancient tradition, older than the war with humanity. When one warrior recognized another's courage, certain honors were required. Even enemies could acknowledge each other's strength. Velnara made a decision that would have horrified her commanders. From specialized glands in her arms, her species could produce a nutritious fluid that sustained their young during the first months of life. It contained proteins and minerals perfectly designed for Corvani physiology. For most other species, these same compounds were deadly poison. The exotic chemistry would shut down their nervous systems within minutes. She had never heard of a human surviving exposure to it. According to their scientists, it should kill any mammalian life form almost instantly. But she found herself extending one of her lower arms toward the dying soldier anyway. The milky substance began to flow from small openings in her crystalline skin, pooling in her palm like liquid starlight. Wu looked at the offered fluid with confusion. He had no idea what it was, but the alien's gestures seemed to indicate it was meant for him to drink. His rational mind told him it was probably poison. Why else would his enemy offer him anything? But his body was shutting down, and rational. Thinking was becoming harder by the minute. Without water, he would die anyway. At least this way it might be quicker. He reached out with trembling hands and accepted the forbidden gift. Kim Wu felt the change beginning almost immediately after drinking the strange fluid. What should have been his final moments instead became something extraordinary. The burning sensation in his throat gradually faded, replaced by a cool, soothing feeling that spread through his entire body. His vision, which had been growing dimmer by the minute, suddenly became crystal clear. The broken bone in his leg still hurt, but the pain had shifted from unbearable agony to something he could actually manage. He could feel his body doing something impossible, processing the alien substance that should have killed him within seconds. Instead of dying, he was getting stronger. Velnara watched this transformation with growing amazement and fear. In all her years as a warrior, she had never seen anything like it. The human's pale, grayish skin was returning to a healthy color. His breathing, which had been shallow and labored, was becoming deep and steady. Most shocking of all, she could see his broken leg beginning to heal itself. When Wu tried to stand up, she quickly moved to support him with 2 of her 6 arms. He was still weak, but the difference was remarkable. 20 minutes ago, he had been dying. Now he looked like he might actually survive. But Velnara knew that survival was only the beginning of his problems. Using gestures and crude drawings scratched into the desert sand, she began to tell him a story that would change everything he thought he knew about the war between their species. Her long fingers traced symbols and pictures in the red dust, creating a primitive but effective form of communication. The first drawing showed the Corvani homeworld as it had been thousands of years ago, a peaceful civilization that had never known war. The second drawing showed ships arriving from the stars, carrying creatures that looked remarkably like humans. The third drawing showed those same creatures spreading across multiple worlds, adapting to each environment, growing stronger with every challenge. Wu studied the sand drawings with growing understanding. Velnara was telling him that humans were not the first of their kind that the Corvani had encountered. There had been others, similar species that shared humanity's greatest gift and greatest curse, the ability to adapt to anything. The ancient Corvani texts called them Keth Mori, the endless adapters. According to legend, they were a species that could survive on any world, eat any food and overcome any obstacle. They were not evil, but they were dangerous in a way that few other species could understand. They changed everything they touched, not through conquest but through simple survival. Velnara's drawings showed what had happened to those other species. They had not been destroyed by war or natural disaster. They had simply been absorbed. The endless adapters had integrated their biology, their technology, their culture. Within a few generations, the original species had disappeared, transformed into something new. The Corvani had watched this happen to 7 different civilizations. Over the course of 2,000 years, each time they had tried to make contact, to establish peaceful relations. Each time the result had been the same. The endless adapters did not conquer through violence. They conquered through evolution. When humans first appeared in Corvani space, every alarm bell in their ancient consciousness had started ringing. Here was another species with the same terrifying gift. Another group of endless adapters who could become anything they needed to become in order to survive. The war had not started because the Corvani hated humans. It had started because they were absolutely terrified of what humans might become. As Wu absorbed this revelation, he began to understand why his body had been able to process the alien fluid. His species' adaptability was not just about surviving harsh environments or eating unusual foods. It was about incorporating anything they encountered into their biology, making it part of themselves. In the distance, dust clouds were rising on the horizon. More Corvani warriors were approaching, probably searching for Velnara after she had failed to report in. The desert wind picked up, blowing sand across Velnara's crude drawings. She quickly smoothed out a fresh section of ground and began creating new symbols, her 6 arms moving with urgent precision. Kim Wu watched intently, his newly enhanced vision allowing him to see details in her crystalline skin that he had missed before. Tiny patterns of light pulsed beneath the surface, almost like a heartbeat made of energy. Velnara's first new drawing showed a creature that looked disturbingly familiar. It had 2 arms, 2 legs, and a head shaped exactly like a human's, but this figure was surrounded by symbols that Wu didn't recognize at first. She pointed at the drawing, then at him, then back at the drawing. The message was clear. This ancient legend was about his people. The next series of drawings told a story that made Wu's blood run cold. The first panel showed a peaceful world with beings that looked like walking trees, tall, graceful creatures with bark-like skin and leaves instead of hair. Velnara drew them living in harmony with their forest planet, building cities that grew rather than being constructed. Then came the human-like figures, small at first, just a few ships landing on the tree people's world. The drawings showed them being welcomed, given food and shelter. The tree beings were clearly trying to help these strange visitors from space. But in the next panel, everything had changed. The human-like figures were no longer small and helpless. They had grown larger, stronger. Their ships had multiplied. Most disturbing of all, some of them now looked partially like the tree people. They had developed bark-like patches on their skin and leaf-like growths on their heads. The final panel in this sequence showed the tree people's world completely transformed. The original inhabitants were gone, but the human-like figures remained. They had not destroyed the tree people through war or violence. They had simply become them, absorbing their biology and their culture, until nothing of the original species remained. Velnara created more drawing sequences, each one showing the same pattern. A peaceful species encounters the human-like visitors. They try to help. The visitors adapt, change, and eventually replace them entirely. 7 different worlds, 7 different species. Whole gone, but not destroyed in any traditional sense. Wu felt his stomach turn as he realized what she was showing him. These weren't stories of conquest or invasion. They were stories of evolution run wild. His people, or beings very much like them, had not set out to destroy other species. They had simply survived so well that they accidentally erased everyone else. The most terrifying drawing came last. It showed the human-like figures spreading across multiple star systems, each generation more adapted to their environment than the last. They were becoming something beyond their original form, incorporating traits from every species they encountered. The drawing suggested they were heading towards something that was no longer recognizably human at all. Velnara pointed at this final image, then gestured toward the horizon where dust clouds marked the approach of more Corvani warriors. Her meaning was unmistakable. Her people believed that humans were the return of these legendary eternal adapters. The war was not about territory or resources, it was about survival itself. She drew one last symbol in the sand. It showed 2 figures facing each other across a great divide. One was clearly Corvani, the other human. Between them was a question mark. Wu understood. The ancient prophecies had spoken of the eternal adapters as an unstoppable force that would eventually consume the galaxy. But prophecies could be wrong. The fact that she had saved his life proved that the future was not set in stone. The approaching dust clouds were getting closer. Soon Velnara would have to choose between the beliefs that had driven her people for thousands of years and the evidence of her own eyes. The human she had saved was not a mindless devourer. He was just a soldier trying to survive. But survival, as she had just shown him, could be the most dangerous weapon of all. The changes started small, so subtle that Kim Woo almost missed them at first. About an hour after drinking Velnara's life-giving fluid, he noticed that his hearing had become incredibly sharp. He could pick up the faint scratching sounds of desert insects moving beneath the sand 20 feet away. The distant rumble of approaching Corvany vehicles, which should have been barely audible, now sounded as clear as thunder. But it was more than just better hearing. Somehow he was beginning to understand the musical tones that Velnara made when she breathed. At first, he had assumed they were just random sounds, like sighs or grunts. Now he realized they were actually a form of communication. Chemical. Signals mixed with subtle sound patterns that carried meaning beyond simple words. When she made a low humming noise, he could sense her anxiety about the approaching patrol. When the tone shifted higher, he felt her confusion about what to do with him. It was like having a translator built directly into his brain, except the translation was happening at a level deeper than conscious thought. Wu flexed his hands and was shocked by how steady they were. Just hours ago, he had been shaking from dehydration and pain. Now his fingers moved with the precision of a surgeon. He picked up a small stone and found that he could balance it on the tip of his index finger without any effort at all. His hand-eye coordination had improved dramatically. The broken bone in his leg was healing at an impossible rate. He could actually feel the fracture knitting itself back together, a strange tickling sensation deep inside his bone. When he carefully tested his weight on it, there was still some pain, but nothing like the agonizing torture he had felt before. At this rate, he would be walking normally within a day or two, but the most startling change was in his vision. The desert around him had transformed from a harsh, blinding wasteland into something almost beautiful. He could see layers of heat waves rising from the sand, each one containing information about wind patterns and temperature variations. The rocks around them weren't just grey stone anymore. They were alive with subtle color variations that told him their mineral composition and age. When he looked at Velnara, the change in his perception was even more dramatic. Her crystalline skin wasn't just pretty decoration. It was a complex communication system, constantly shifting patterns of light and color that conveyed her emotional state. Right now, those patterns were swirling with conflict and uncertainty. Wu stood up carefully, testing his improved balance. His muscles felt different, more responsive and coordinated than they had ever been. When he moved, it was with a fluid grace that reminded him of the way Velnara had moved when she first appeared. Not quite alien, but definitely not entirely human either. The realization hit him like a physical blow. He was becoming something new. His body wasn't just healing from the effects of the alien fluid. It was incorporating the biological information contained in that substance, learning from it, adapting to it. The same way his ancestors had adapted to new climates and environments on Earth, except this was happening in hours instead of generations. Velnara had been watching his transformation with growing fascination and alarm. She made a series of complex tonal patterns that his enhanced senses translated as amazement mixed with fear. In her language, she was saying something like, "Impossible change, and legend becomes real." Wu tried to respond and was shocked when musical tones came out of his mouth instead of words. Somehow his vocal cords had learned to produce the same pheromone-enhanced communication that the Corvani used. He was speaking her language without even realizing he had learned it. The approaching dust clouds were much closer now. He could make out individual vehicles and even sense the emotional states of their occupants through trace pheromones carried on the wind. They were excited, probably expecting to find evidence of a successful hunt. Instead, they were about to discover something that would challenge everything they thought they knew about humans and their own ancient fears. The first Corvani vehicle crested the dune like a metal predator emerging from the sand. Its sleek, crystalline hull reflected the harsh sunlight in brilliant flashes that would have blinded Kim Woo just hours earlier. Now his enhanced vision automatically adjusted, filtering out the glare while picking up details that would have been invisible to normal human eyes. 3 more vehicles followed, their anti-gravity engines creating ripples in the desert air. Wu could sense the emotional signatures of their occupants even from a distance. Confidence mixed with bloodlust. They were coming to collect trophies from what they assumed would be his corpse. Velnara moved protectively closer to him, her 6 arms shifting into defensive positions. Through the pheromone communication that his body now understood perfectly, she was broadcasting complex warnings. Her scent carried messages of confusion, determination, and something that roughly translated as situation changed beyond recognition. The lead vehicle touched down about 50 yards away, its hull plate sliding open with mechanical precision. 4 Corvani warriors emerged, each one larger and more heavily armored than Velnara. Their crystalline skin had taken on deeper, more aggressive color patterns. War paint, Wu realized. They had marked themselves for battle. The war party's leader was a massive male whose skin pulsed with angry red patterns. From the elaborate scarring carved into his crystal plates, Wu could tell this was a veteran of many campaigns. His pheromone signature identified him as Korthak, a name that roughly meant Deathbringer in their musical language. Korthak strode forward confidently, expecting to find Velnara standing over a human corpse. Instead, he stopped dead in his tracks when he saw Wu standing upright beside her, clearly alive and alert. But it was more than just surprise that made the war party hesitate. Something about the human's presence was setting off every instinctive alarm their species possessed. Wu wasn't just alive, he was radiating an energy that made their crystalline skin dim with involuntary fear responses. The change in Wu was visible now, even to eyes that had never seen a human before. His posture was different, more balanced and predatory. His movements had taken on some of the fluid grace that characterized Corvani warriors. Most disturbing of all, his eyes had developed a slight luminescence that reflected light in ways that human eyes simply shouldn't. When Korthak demanded an explanation, in rapid, aggressive pheromone bursts, Wu found himself responding before Velnara could answer. The musical tones that came from his throat were perfect Corvani, carrying subtle chemical signatures that identified him as something new. Not human, not Corvani, but something that incorporated elements of both. The effect on the war party was immediate and terrifying. Their skin patterns shifted to colors that Wu's enhanced understanding recognized as primal fear. These were ancient warning signals, genetic memories of the legendary eternal adapters that their species had fought against thousands of years ago. One of the younger warriors, his name scent identifying him as Zekrin, raised his energy weapon with shaking hands. But when he tried to fire, nothing happened. The weapon's biometric sensors were designed to respond only to Corvani life signs. Wu's transformed biology was apparently confusing the targeting systems. Korthak barked orders for a manual override, but his warriors were paralyzed by something deeper than conscious fear. Their crystalline skin was now pulsing with colors that meant ancient enemy detected and prophecy fulfilled. Thousands of years of genetic memory were screaming at them to run. Wu stepped forward, his movements causing the entire war party to take an involuntary step back. He wasn't trying to be threatening, but something about his presence was triggering every survival instinct the Corvani possessed. Through pheromone communication, he tried to project peaceful intentions. But the very fact that he could use their most intimate form of expression only made things worse. A human shouldn't be able to speak the language of scent and chemical signals. The fact that he could was proof that their worst fears were coming. True, the standoff stretched taut like a wire about to snap. 4 seasoned Corvani warriors, armed with weapons capable of leveling city blocks, were afraid to attack a single injured human soldier, because he wasn't just human anymore. The tension snapped when Zekrin, the youngest warrior, overcame his fear long enough to manually activate his weapon. The energy blast that erupted from his rifle should have vaporized Kim Wu instantly. Instead, something impossible happened. Wu moved. Not the clumsy stumbling of an injured human, but with liquid grace that seemed to bend the laws of physics. He flowed sideways like water, the deadly energy beam passing harmlessly through the space where he had been standing just a microsecond before. The blast struck the rocks behind him, turning solid stone into glowing vapor. But Wu had already seen the attack coming. Through his enhanced senses, he had detected the shift in Zekrin's pheromone patterns, the electrical build-up in the weapon, even the subtle muscle tensions that preceded the trigger pull. His transformed nervous system had processed all this information and reacted before the young Corvani warrior had even completed his thought to fire. Korthak roared in their musical language, ordering his warriors to surround the human. But as they moved to encircle him, Wu demonstrated abilities that should have been physically impossible for any member of his species. When the second warrior, Val Tech, fired from Wu's left side, the human simply wasn't there anymore. He had somehow predicted the angle of attack and moved with inhuman speed to avoid it. The energy beam meant for him instead struck the third warrior's shoulder, sending crystalline fragments flying in all directions. What followed was less like a battle and more like a deadly dance. 4 experienced Corvani warriors, each one trained from birth in combat, found themselves unable to land a single hit on their target. Wu moved through their attacks like he could see the future, always. One step ahead of their weapons and tactics, but it wasn't precognition that gave him this advantage. His enhanced senses were picking up information that no human should have been able to process. He could smell the electrical charges building in their weapons before they fired. He could see the micro-expressions that preceded each attack. He could feel the vibrations in the ground that told him exactly where each warrior was positioned, even when they were behind him. When Korthak finally managed to graze him with an energy blast that should have severed his arm, Wu simply absorbed the impact. His skin showed no burns, no damage at all. Instead, he seemed to grow brighter, as if the weapon's energy had somehow made him stronger. The war party's coordinated assault began to fall apart as panic set in. These were warriors who had never known defeat, who had conquered entire human colonies without losing a single battle. Now they were being systematically outmaneuvered by a single injured soldier who should have been dead hours ago. Velnara watched the impossible combat with growing amazement and horror. Everything the ancient texts had warned about was happening. Right in front of her eyes. The human wasn't just surviving their attacks, he was learning from them, adapting to them, becoming more dangerous with each passing second. When Zekrin tried to tackle him physically, Wu responded with strength that no human should have possessed. He caught the 12-foot-tall warrior in mid-leap and redirected his momentum, sending him crashing into a rocky outcropping with enough force to crack stone. But the most terrifying moment came when Korthak unleashed his most powerful weapon, a plasma cannon that could punch through starship hulls. The blast hit Wu directly in the chest, engulfing him in energy hot enough to melt metal. When the light faded, he was still standing. His clothes were gone, burned away by the incredible heat, but his skin showed only a faint glow where the plasma had struck. As they watched in horror, even that faint mark began to fade. Wu looked down at himself in amazement. He could feel his body incorporating the energy that should have killed him, learning from it, making it part of his ever-changing biology. Each attack was just teaching him how to survive the next one. The ancient prophecy was coming true before their eyes. Humans didn't just adapt to new environments, they adapted to everything, including weapons designed to destroy them. The silence that followed the failed attack was deafening. 4 of the Corvani Empire's most feared warriors stood frozen in disbelief, their weapons useless against an enemy who had just absorbed enough energy to power a small city. Kim Wu remained perfectly still in the center of their broken formation, his transformed body radiating a soft luminescence that made the desert sand around his feet glow like starlight. Korthak's massive frame trembled as the full weight of their situation hit him. Every attack had only made the human stronger. Every weapon they used taught him how to defend against it. They were facing exactly what their ancestors had warned them about for 3,000 years, an enemy that could not be defeated through force because force only made them more powerful. The young warrior Zekrin tried to stand up from where he had crashed into the rocks, but his crystalline armor was cracked in multiple places. Bright blue fluid leaked from the fractures, and his pheromone signature carried waves of pain and confusion. He had been trained to fight humans, but this creature was something beyond their understanding. Wu could sense the fear radiating from all of them. Their chemical communications painted a picture of warriors who had reached the limits of their courage. But underneath that fear, he detected something else, a desperate desire to understand what was happening to their carefully ordered universe. He took a single step forward, and all 4 Corvani warriors immediately raised their weapons again. But Wu wasn't moving to attack. Instead, he did something that shocked them more than any display of strength could have. He knelt down in the sand and placed his hands on the ground in a gesture that their culture recognized as complete submission. Then, using the complex pheromone, language that his body had somehow learned to produce, he began to speak. "I am not your enemy," his chemical signals said, carrying undertones of sincerity that could not be faked. "I am what you made me, but I choose what I become." The words hit the Corvani like a physical blow. Their ancient texts had never mentioned the possibility that the eternal adapters could choose their own evolution. The prophecies spoke of mindless consumption, of species that grew and changed without any conscious control over their transformations. Velnara stepped forward, her own pheromone communications adding layers of meaning to Wu's words. She told her fellow warriors about the mercy she had shown, about the humans' refusal to surrender even when dying, about the impossible choice that had led to this moment. Korthak lowered his plasma cannon slowly, his scarred face showing emotions that Wu's enhanced senses could read as clearly as words on a page. The war party leader was realizing that everything he had believed about humans might be wrong. "You drink our poison and live," Korthak's pheromones carried disbelief and awe. "You absorb our weapons and grow stronger. You speak our sacred language with a human tongue. Are you the beginning of our end?" Wu stood up carefully, his movements deliberately slow and non-threatening. When he spoke again, his chemical communications carried harmonics that shouldn't have been possible for a human throat to produce. "I could be," he said honestly, "but I choose not to be. My people adapt because we must survive. But survival doesn't have to mean conquest. It can mean cooperation." He extended his hand toward Korthak in the universal human gesture of greeting, but the pheromones his body released carried Corvani meanings as well, chemical signals that spoke of alliance, mutual respect and shared strength. "Your prophecies speak of a species that consumes everything it touches," Wu continued. "But prophecies can be guides, not chains. I have taken part of your nature into myself, but I offer you something in return, the chance to adapt as we do, to grow stronger together instead of destroying each other." The war party exchanged rapid pheromone bursts, their communications too complex and rapid for Wu to follow completely, but he could sense the shift in their emotional signatures. Fear was giving way to something he had never expected to detect from Corvani warriors. Hope. For the first time in 3,000 years, they were seeing a path forward that didn't end in the complete destruction of one species or the other.